We should be starting shortly. Everyone's all settled in. We're good? All right. Welcome to our panel on transforming regional rail in the Philadelphia Metro. We'll be discussing the past, present, and future of SEPTA Rail and how we can prioritize safety and equity. Tonight's keynote speaker is Dr. Vukan Vucic, an expert on transit systems, followed by Sandy Johnson, a transit analyst, and Ethan Finland of Transit Matters, a Boston transit advocacy group. We will also be hearing from Chris Pachowski of Otis, the city's Office of Transportation, and Fifth Square Transit Committee member Ben Shee. I'm your host, Cameron Jamas. My pronouns are they, them. Now for the background of our program. In late July, Fifth Square started a petition to restore and improve regional rail service. Transit Committee members Camille Bogan and Krista Gieri wrote about the rationale behind the petition for WHYY. Quote, "The regional rail system we have today is a product of decades of structural racism. Regional rail operates separately from the rest of the system, rather as a part of an integrated network. We want SEPTA to do what it really takes to save regional rail, incorporate it within an integrated network. We want SEPTA to restore service on all of its rail lines, lower regional rail fares to match bus, subway, and trolley fares within Philadelphia, and accept TransPass on regional rail trips within Philadelphia." Now we'll be starting the keynote and follow-up questions, then a panel, and a general question and answer session. Feel free to add your questions to the Q&A section of the application. And with that, I will be handing the floor over to Dr. Vucic.
Yes, you see me and hear me right now? Okay. I have a difficult task to squeeze material that could be discussed for 2 semesters within 40 minutes. What is regional rail? In many, especially large cities, the long-distance trains were brought to the edge of the center city. And usually terminals are located around the CBD at different distances. That was, for example, the case in London, which has about 11 stop stations, and they're all connected by their tube, by the metro. Moscow has also about 10 major terminals. Munich had 2 of them on the 2 sides, Frankfurt, Brussels, Paris, and so on. What became obvious as the cities grew up more and more and the automobiles came and we have to provide high reliable, high capacity rail transit system, the cities saw that if they connect the lines and terminals on 2 sides of the center, then they can connect them and make, instead of 2 stub-end lines, the diametrical lines that go across the region. This has been done very successfully in Munich, in Frankfurt, in Brussels, in Paris, and so on. Now, Philadelphia had 2 stations, so-called suburban station, very poor name, suburban when it's in center city. That's so-called Penn Center. And that belonged to Pennsylvania Railroad. And that had 6 lines converging to Penn Center in the station, in the center. The second one was former Reading Railway, and that is that terminated east of the City Hall on level +2. The Pennsylvania was -2. It became obvious that connecting those 2 will improve the entire network of regional rail in Philadelphia. So it was planned for about 20 years, this so-called Center City Commuter Connection, CCCC, that the Reading lines would be lowered down from level +2 into -2, and Pennsylvania on -2, and then they connect downtown in the center city. The advantages of such tunnel are great. It would really create one unified network covering the entire region, so that people can travel through center city or transfer from one line to another. It really becomes something like regional metro, so that rail system. The tunnel then created a network with 13 lines meeting in center city. Now, what happened was that in 1980s, the construction of that tunnel started, and there were some other developments. SEPTA was taking over the regional rail lines from Pennsylvania Railroad and Reading Railroad. The unions of labor unions had to be integrated. And then in addition to that, also the airport line was being finished and being opened in 1984. We at the University of Pennsylvania got a contract from SEPTA. David Gunn was the general manager, very capable guy who really pushed things and finished. He was later president of Amtrak and several other major cities, Toronto and so on. He gave us the project to look at the new system with connecting lines and how to organize those lines, which lines should connect with which on the two sides of the center city. How would the scheduling go? How is the information? How is the ticketing? And all of this. We then, at the University of Pennsylvania and my colleague at University of Delaware, produced the report, General Operations Plan for the SEPTA Regional Rail System. That was a report that really collected all information, put it together, and provided for all kinds of planning. So this is the network. It's somewhat unusual that the two lines, Pennsylvania mostly from west and the northwest, southwest, and Reading from the north, but they also partly overlap and cross each other. We made that study and the number of passengers on each line and the switches and the terminals and so on. I had a team of students from engineering at Penn and city planning, and we made several teams. And also I invited 4 gentlemen from SEPTA to go to Europe. And we went in Europe to Munich, Cologne, Paris, and Hamburg, and analyzed their S-Bahn, that's the regional rail in Germany. So all those systems were connected from two sides, like Munich connected like that. And from two systems in Munich that had 150,000 daily passengers, when the tunnel was connected and electrified and really became like a metro system, the ridership went from 150,000 to 600,000, and today they're closer to 1 million. We saw in those cities how those regional rail lines are designated by S-Bahn and so on, and we suggested that we should make it R1, R2, R3 as distinct lines of that network. And which we also produced which line should connect with which on the south and north and east and west and so on. So we worked closely with SEPTA, and SEPTA took our recommendations to create these R designated lines. We then, this was implemented. Whatever we recommended was implemented in operation. In addition to that, we produced two other major reports about regional rail and several other reports. We produced many for SEPTA. But the two that we produced in 1990s, one was a plan for SEPTA's regional metro rail system. That is, what should this present system look like in 20 years, 30 years, and so on? Analysis of operations and stations and so on was done in great detail. And I'll summarize here some of the findings. The second report was short-term improvements for SEPTA's regional rail system. And that really covered many things that SEPTA could do better, could increase, improve schedules, unify fares, attract people, and really increase ridership. These reports were really emphasizing we have to look in the future. How should these lines be modernized from those from 1900, when the conductors were shouting the names of stations and going and punching the tickets with very large crews. The crew of the trains is the engineer or the driver of the train and one conductor or one member per car, so that even two-car trains have 3-man or 3-person crews, and 5-car trains have 6-person crews. This is very labor intensive and therefore very expensive, and for that reason that there are so many labor members in the crews, SEPTA could not afford frequent services, so that the services in off-peak hours and evening and so on is hourly service, and that is not very satisfactory. It's inconvenient for passengers, but also if the trains run every hour, then if you come on a Doylestown line and you want to transfer to Wilmington line, if the trains miss each other, you may wait for 55 minutes in downtown just to transfer. So the short headways are convenient and increase utilization of the lines. The situation is now, or was now in 1980s, and it's even up to today, that we have the most comprehensive regional rail network that covers the broad region, even in 2 other states. It is all electrified, and it's excellent network, but it is operated in many ways very primitively, like 100 years ago. So the problem is that manpower, and we analyze then, how can we make smaller crews? And we define 17 tasks that have to be done on the train, from driving the train to announcing to collect tickets and so on. And then we analyzed how could we reduce that crew so that it's only engineer and 1 conductor. And the main reasons why we cannot do that now is that there is manual fare collection. so that conductor has to come and punch and check tickets of everybody. That is always then requires large crews. And the second one, why the crews must be there, is the fact that we have low and high platforms at stations. Some stations low and some high. And that has then the plates that conductor has to lift and lower whenever the train goes from a low level station to high level and opposite. Our recommendation was that stations should be upgraded into high platform. Now, doing all 165 or so stations, building high level platforms is expensive, but it should be gradually done as the financing allows. But it should not be random. It should be in continuous stations so that the crew has to do maybe once, but not more. This problem of stations, high level and low level, is very serious, but unfortunately, SEPTA in the beginning, as I said, implemented our plan, but then SEPTA really made many changes that were counterproductive, and they created problems and really degraded the type of service that we get on the system. What are the problems? Well, the philosophy of regional rail crew in SEPTA is that most riders are peak hour riders, so we should really neglect the others. Instead of encouraging utilization of this network that covers the entire region and really making it easier to go from one line to another and to go from any point to any point, not only to CBD, that was, instead of encouraged, SEPTA did measures that discouraged that or made it very difficult. One terrible thing that is being done now is that there is construction of high platform stations randomly along some lines. So if there is a rebuilt high level platform on a line which has all other low level, the crew has to go there to lower it and then to raise it again, so that the high level platforms really slow down the entire operation and makes it very difficult. Construction of high platform stations increases the duties of conductors, and it slows travel time, so that the trains now don't have higher speed than they had in 1913. The claim that building one station with high platforms costs $10 million is incorrect. For example, the Seacane station on the Elwyn line could have been built for many millions of dollars less than 22 million. Really, it's amazing how wrong designs were used. First of all, one station was 49th Street Station, where the platform, high platform, was designed for handicapped, but the rest of it was low-level platform, although it is next to a high-level platform at University City. So this was a disaster in 49th Street, extremely expensive and counterproductive and impossible to operate. They forced people then to go from short platform for handicapped. They were forced to go down in order to climb the other passengers, in order to climb up into the trains. On Seakane Station, something is well known, and the station, the entire network was designed in 100 years ago, 120 years ago, so that the stations on the outbound side are much smaller because people get off and go away. The inbound platforms are much bigger because that's where people buy tickets and have to wait and so on. Seakane has the station designed for the outbound thousands of passengers. It has benches. It has 12 benches per one side. Nobody will ever sit on any one of those benches. Any one of those designers took my course, he would not have gotten a passing grade. So then another thing that SEPTA did was to abandon R1, R2, R3 designations and give names by end stations. If you take a schedule of SEPTA's lines, you will see how difficult it is to discover which line is where. What is Allen Lane train? Where is it? On which station? We don't know now that it is R3 or R4 and so on. So that was a discouragement, and especially when they abandoned the R's, the schedules were made so that one train going from Elwyn to Center City goes to West Trenton, and then the next train goes to Center City and goes to Chestnut Hill East or something like that. So the concept of fixed lines with regular headways has been eliminated. It's a random schedule for each train. It's a terrible mistake. Then came even slamming of the door plates to raise or lower the steps at every station. Is very noisy, dangerous for the conductors, and delaying services. Now, I should say that this was a federal requirement, and I just think that New Jersey Transit, Metro North, and SEPTA should have stood in Washington and said, we cannot flip these plates every 45 seconds for every station, up and down. It's unbelievable. The state trains were not designed with that, and this is a very great problem that has been created. Really, all of these created more problems than solved. Many advantages that were created by the Center City Tunnel have been decreased or eliminated by these changes in operations. Even in operations, during the very long introduction of new fares, the SEPTA sent in Center City stations, including University City, up to 8 crew members, 8 conductors standing there in the station and really doing nothing except saying, good morning, welcome to SEPTA. That goal went on for more than a year, for 8 or 12 hours a day. Labor was used extensively. It would have been much better not to use that money for people who are conductors who do nothing, and decrease some of the extremely high fares that we have on regional rail. Now, the main problem of these policies and confusion is that SEPTA's regional rail division does not have a clear picture of the regional rail system for the future. When I asked them, well, how do you see it? Well, we don't see decrease of size of crews. Well, if they don't, then we are stuck with hourly and 2-hourly headways. We cannot afford this. There is no really an integrated plan what the system of regional rail will or should look like in 2025, 30, 35. It has been now 40 years since we submitted these reports to SEPTA. If they followed our recommendations that we build high-level platforms continuously, not jumping randomly, and then one line would be completely high level, and then the next line would be high level, and so on, we would have had by now at least 3 such lines in operation. No, now we have the same problem worsened by randomly putting stations in the middles of lines. This is the goal should be to reduce crews and increase the number of trains so that headways of 30 minutes could be introduced on most lines. Shorter headways, especially during off-peak hours, would make transfers among lines much more convenient. It is really, I visit SEPTA from time to time. I hardly get an appointment every waiting 3 or 6 months. I come with all these proposals. I submit again, show this, our plan, short-term improvements for SEPTA. SEPTA doesn't have a copy of that, it was lost. So they take a copy of that, but nothing is done even from that report. And many of those things that we suggested could be done in order to increase frequency of service, decrease the fares, and integrate regional rail with the subway surface, trolleys, and buses. We really should also question, does SEPTA want to maximize revenues or to maximize number of passengers? That is very important. It changes the attraction of regional rail. And we, with this excellent network, should modernize operations and really look into the future and learn from other cities. Can that be done, what I'm suggesting, on the stations with different levels of platforms and so on? Well, in Caltrain line in San Francisco was the same as SEPTA and not even electrified. So it was diesels, conductors jumping down, shouting the names of stations, tickets, and so on. They then introduced machines at stations. They have only one conductor and one engineer. And people who have problems look for, it's random checking. And this is something that is done on all new systems and upgrading of old systems. So it can be done, it should be done, and we can learn from other cities, the older systems and new systems, and create, utilize the excellent network of regional rail, which would make Philadelphia a much more livable city and competitive with the others.
All right, Cameron, are you there? Thank you, Dr. Vucic, for the excellent presentation. Yeah, so cool. I think
Yeah, let's go ahead and start some Q&A. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So yeah, we've only received a few questions, but definitely, yeah, there was definitely a lot to discuss and talk about. One question from Roy Sweeney is that for Professor Vucic, in your opinion, why did SEPTA make all these bad choices? Was it intentional or just basically incompetence? And what do we do to avoid them from continuing to happen?
Well, this elimination of not only designations R1, R2, R3, but really of fixed lines so that trains go always have the same image, that all trains go from Doylestown to Paoli and so on. That was done because it's more convenient for operations. And passengers were not only disregarded, but there was an argument for that was really untrue. It's really, they say that they have passengers going wrong way because of these lines that are going through Center City. They go to the train going to Trenton instead of going to the airport. That's absolute nonsense. If that is true, then people going on buses or on subways can go wrong way. If they have bus 42 and they take it in the wrong direction, they'll go in the wrong direction. So this is not true. Plus, if there is a problem of passengers, then you should do much better with the signing. Look at a 5-car train. It has sometimes wrong plates showing destination, and most of these next to the doors do not exist. So you're running after a train and want to see where it's going. You very often cannot see it on the train. You miss the train by the time you figure out where it's going. So if your attitude would be much more to make it more convenient for passengers, not for operators, we could get more passengers. One of our recommendations in those short-term improvements is that SEPTA and New Jersey Transit have an excellent connection from 30th Street Station to Trenton, transfer, and then to New York, which costs 25 or 30% of the full Amtrak fare. But there is no advertising for that connection. Whenever I mention somebody, you can take the train. Oh, I didn't know that. I could take the family there, yes. And there is just, and I was on the train to Trenton once, and somebody asked the conductor, how do I transfer? I know nothing about New Jersey Transit. So yeah. There is no good marketing. If you would pay much more attention to passenger needs rather than convenience of travel.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Just a few more questions. I guess, so what do you think would be the most high priority, aspects of Regional Route 2 target right now, including maybe, stations for high-level platforms?
Well, I think high-level platforms should be built as much as possible, but it doesn't have to be $10 or $22 million per station. Mm-hmm. For that $22 million, they could have done 6 or 8 other stations, high platform. And then it should also, pure design, as I said, the station, CK station is now designed as if all people were going to Elwyn rather than to Center City. It's wrong design, so it's wasted enormous quantities of concrete and benches. Go to CK station and look at those 8 or 10 huge benches on which nobody will ever sit. So competence should be better.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe just a few more then. What do you think about the way when European systems modernized their regional rail? What were some examples of what they did with conductors, and how did they, transition them out from conductor service to, like, proof of payment?
Well, yes, fare collection is important, but in many countries now, they have a proof of payment, as we call it, tickets that passengers must purchase a ticket. And they are checked only randomly, not every time. Why is that? Well, on the subway, Market Frankfurt, and so on, all stations are closed with turnstiles. So you can check that going in and going out. With regional rail, you cannot do that because we have these 165 stations or whatever way out in the fields. It's impossible to fence them off. So you cannot do that. And we have to change. SEPTA had, in new fares and so on, SEPTA had several people who really did not want any spot check. They just wanted to have it a closed system. Well, with regional rail, really, that cannot be done. We should make it so that there is a spot check, and therefore sometimes you check, and who doesn't have a ticket, he has to pay a penalty. But that is the system that is being used all over regional rail systems, all over Europe, and now in all recently built regional rail systems have that proof of payment.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. So as we have a tight schedule, I think that will be it for comments right now. But definitely, we will have other panelists, and you can submit comments that way too. Please, when you do your comments, you can submit them to Will Tong in your chat box. That'd be good. Thank you. Okay. Once again, we want to definitely thank Dr. Vucic for your presentation and for your time tonight.
You're welcome.
Back to Cameron.
Thank you. That was great. Now we're going to have Sandy Johnson give his talk. Ben, if you can get these slides ready. Sandy, you're on.
All right, excellent. I am not seeing the slides. There we are. Okay, great. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
All right. So good evening, everyone. My name is Sandy Johnston. In my day job, I'm a transportation planner for the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, but I'm here tonight in a personal capacity. Thanks so much to Fifth Square for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. I'll be talking about SEPTA's Center City Tunnel, or as it was once labeled, as Professor Vucic mentioned, the Center City Commuter Connection, and specifically about the history of the politics that brought it into being and lessons that we can learn from that process for today's transit planning. I want to make a few things clear up front. First, I'm greatly honored to follow Professor Vucic, whose work I've read for years and greatly respect. Second, I've never lived in Philadelphia. So while I'm very interested in this topic, I'm sure there are things that I don't know or fully understand. So if you think I've got something wrong or I've missed something, please, at some point, let me know, and feel free to say so. And finally, I am, for this talk, reviving work I originally did for a paper when I was in grad school in 2014. So I may be rusty on a few points. We can go to the next slide, please. All right. So I want to place this presentation in the context of patterns of growth in Philadelphia with the help of this nifty GIF. Let's just let it play through the decades. I think the pattern's pretty clear. You see rapid suburbanization starting around World War II, with growth shifting to northeastern Philadelphia and the suburbs, but then a downtown boom over the years after 1990. The last is important because the piece of infrastructure I'm talking about has been given credit for that downtown boom. Next slide, please. So why did Philadelphia build a tunnel connecting its downtown rail lines? You already heard a brief version of this from Professor Vucic, but I'm sure most of you are familiar with the geography. I think it's striking to call up this snippet of an old map, showing the short distance between the respective downtown terminals of the suburban networks of the Reading and Pennsylvania railroads. Note how both are stub-end terminals, where trains had to stop and reverse before heading back to the suburbs, a very inefficient operation. Next slide, please. And just a couple of pictures of those terminals, the old Reading terminal and suburban station. All right. So eventually, once the suburban line ceased to be profitable, the private railroads sought to rid themselves of the obligation to provide service. And they both came under government control, and eventually, just before the tunnel opened, direct operation by the government. SEPTA found itself being one entity in control of two separate systems that basically had been largely built to compete rather than complement each other. Next slide, please. And here we just have a quick timeline of the gradual creation of what we now know as SEPTA. So you can see it took kind of quite a while from the beginning of the concept of subsidy to the suburban rail lines until SEPTA assumed full and direct operation of the regional rail lines in 1983, which was coincidentally a year before the tunnel opened. All right. Next slide, please. But it's not all about transit operation. In addition to the inefficient operations, the stub-end terminals also had a disruptive effect on the city. The notorious viaduct known as the Chinese Wall led to the Pennsylvania Railroad's Broad Street and suburban stations before it was demolished for a revitalization project in 1952, and the tracks were put underground. So there was a sense that physical changes to the transportation system could play a key role in downtown revitalization, regardless of service patterns. Next slide. So how do you get from a disconnected transportation network and a shrinking downtown to really what was a nation-leading tunnel and then a redevelopment boom in Center City? It took a bunch of ideas and developments and struggles at the local, the state, and the federal levels, all across multiple decades. This timeline covers the first couple of decades of that process. And you can really see here how there are different pieces fitting into place at different levels of government. I'm going to talk a little bit about the personalities involved in this project, because like many infrastructure projects, it turns out not to have just been highly politicized, but also driven by a few of these strong personalities. I'm sure most of you are familiar enough with Edmund Bacon that I need not recap his career. As we know, Bacon was really involved in the redevelopment of Center City in all kinds of ways over a period of decades. The idea for the tunnel may have been his, although from what I've read, it was more likely originally the idea of a more junior city planner named R. Damon Childs. I think it's not a stretch to say that the removal of the Chinese Wall in 1952 may have contributed strongly to the idea of linking a tunnel like this to redevelopment plans, and most strongly the Market East project that took almost 20 years to develop. Frank Rizzo, I think, needs no introduction, but he was a critical figure in the building of the tunnel, believing strongly both in downtown redevelopment and in jobs for his political base in what we might now call the white working class. His relationships with the Nixon and Ford administrations, he was famously a Nixon Republicans type of Democrat, were critical in getting the tunnel across the finish line. And I think what's interesting about Rizzo, in addition to his kind of being a horrible human being, is that he, as in terms of his political coalition, he united the quote unquote the neighborhoods, some neighborhoods, with the downtown business coalition, which let him get through big projects like this. Rizzo really worked on John Volpe, Nixon's Secretary of Transportation, but it was Gerald Ford's Transportation Secretary, Bill Pullman, who I think kind of personified the federal government's ambivalence toward the tunnel. He eventually signed off on a very large federal share, but only reluctantly. He shared the federal DOT's long-standing and it turned out justified suspicion that the tunnel was really intended to promote redevelopment rather than prioritize an important transit need or significantly improved service. Notably, Pullman went in, approved the federal share, thinking that many of the jobs would go to Black Philadelphians, and Rizzo redirected those jobs toward his own largely white base. So I think this is one of the really interesting but also critical elements to understand. You think, well, how could anyone oppose a project like this with clear transportation and development or land use benefits? As you can see from this slide, a diverse group of kind of mainly left-leaning, but also preservationist, and some, frankly, NIMBY groups did oppose the tunnel, culminating in a lawsuit that made it to federal district court before being dismissed. To be honest, many of their arguments actually were pretty reasonable, and indeed echo concerns that we hear today. It's not an accident that the federal DOT held up tunnel funding for a decade because of suspicions it wasn't exactly the product of a very logical planning process. As you heard from Professor Fucic, plans to use the tunnel to actually run service that would be useful to everyone, rather than just 9-to-5 white-collar commuters, never did materialize. Or rather, the plans existed because Professor Fucic and his colleagues put them together, but SEPTA never adopted them. And opponents of the tunnel perceived, not entirely incorrectly, that the investment in the tunnel came at the expense of investment in fixing the core SEPTA system used by more riders, who we might classify under the admittedly imperfect term of transit dependent. Not in the sense that this federal grant was in a zero-sum competition with a grant to fix, to cite one example given by opponents, the Broad Street Line's cars that had been built in 1928, but in the sense that the organizational and political energy invested in the tunnel crowded out virtually everything else for a period of 15 or 20 years while the entire rest of the system was falling apart. Ultimately, these arguments didn't defeat the tunnel, and personally, I do think that's a good thing, as even now it still holds unrealized transformative potential. But they absolutely hold lessons even for this moment, which is another moment of systemic crisis. I've already covered most of this, but this is just another look at the timeline of the second half of that long period of development for the tunnel. And you can see again how the developments at the local and federal levels parallel each other. Excellent, yeah, great. So these are just a couple of fun graphics, and if you're interested in the sources for any of this, it's all in the bibliography of the paper that I saw Ben put the link in the chat. So this shows the path of the tunnel as it was built from a couple of different perspectives. You can see it links the old Reading and Pennsylvania railroad systems, replacing the Step-End Reading terminal with the New Market East station. And from the elevation profile at the bottom there, you can see how the tunnel really had to dive under and over several obstacles within a relatively short distance. So note that this tunnel actually, for all of the drama around it, actually ended up being pretty cheap by the standards of American infrastructure. The cost of $323 million in 1984 would translate to around $810 million today, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually fairly cheap for a project this complex. We've had a lot of construction cost inflation since then, and I'll direct you to the upcoming report by Alon Levy and Eric Goldwyn, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, for more on that. So just to flash back to the separate systems before on the left, and then the R numbers that Professor Fucic suggested and was talking about on the right there after the tunnel opened. One thing that I want to call attention to is the diesel lines that SEPTA operated before the tunnel opened, which you can see in gray in the before graphic here. And the Center City Tunnel does not accommodate diesel trains. So many of those extensions of the SEPTA network to the Lehigh Valley to Reading and out to Westchester and even service to Newark via West Trenton were abandoned when the tunnel opened. And again, just coming back to this graphic, to this GIF with the growth patterns, as a reminder of the growth context, and you do see the boom in Center City from 1990 or so, and we can't figure out correlation for causation in terms of the shift to that development happening. There are definitely other factors going on, but it's certainly interesting to see. All right, so just a few lessons learned. I think the thing I'd emphasize the most, which probably isn't a surprise to this group, is that the initial concerns that the tunnel was intended to promote development rather than actually good transit service for everyone seem to have been sadly borne out. Even so, the potential for something really transformative remains if that kind of European quality regional rail service can be implemented. The challenge of making the infrastructure worthwhile, really, I would say, is pretty much the same now as it was 40 years ago. All right, so I'd be happy to take questions. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. We're going to save the Q&A for that for later, but if you have any questions for Sandy, go ahead and send them to Will. Ben, you're next. You ready?
Yep, I will share my screen right now. Oh, right. Oh, well. Oh. Sorry, I'll reload. Okay, so we can start now, but my presentation will basically be talking about some of the equity components that Fifth Square is looking for when we're developing our regional rail plan, which will come, as a long-term project. Just looking at, demographics and whatnot around SEPTA. So yeah, I'm a volunteer with Fifth Square, and yeah, so we've been doing a bit of regional rail advocacy over the past year, definitely. Especially since the pandemic, since ridership has dropped around 9%. We work closely with SEPTA and elected officials really to make this, make Bear Regional Rail a reality. Because right now, even after the tunnel, right, Regional Rail remains a peak-oriented premium hourly commuter service that is, one, extremely resistant to change, and two, has outside attention from Harrisburg politicians, which means that, that is the mode of transit they know best when they think about SEPTA. And so it's really resistant to change. So our pending plan really does aim to center around equity, following a plan produced by Boston's Transit Matters advocacy group, which we really think is outstanding. And just a quick fact, it's important to know that regional rail comprises 1/2 of all track miles in the city of Philadelphia, and all 1/3 of stations are within Philadelphia. So when you think about regional rail, we really want to emphasize that a major part of the ridership and of the infrastructure is all located within Philadelphia, this city. Yeah, and you can see definitely the 1984 plan as envisioned by Buchik Ashley. Okay, so let's look at some demographics. These are census tracts within 1/2 mile of a regional rail station, and this is basically to show the demographics and what we think of typical regional rail riders as white suburban commuters is actually not very true when you talk about Philadelphia itself. Here you see percentage of people with a race other than white, so minority population, and you see that within Philadelphia it definitely peaks very much, including low income cities in Norristown and Chester as well. If you look at median income family, you can see a very similar correlation with lower income as you approach the Philadelphia city center. And lastly, if you see, yes, work commute over an hour, you can definitely see that, the urban neighborhoods along regional rail, you would think that they would have, very good service, with regional rail, but yet, their commute times as reported by the census are just very, very long, compared to suburbanites. And so this indicates a problem with underutilization and other, aspects with regional rail. We really think of it as a dichotomy of two markets, as we have the outer suburban market and the inner, poorer market. And so this needs to be considered by SEPTA as well, we think. And so here is two maps produced by the Pew Charitable Trust. This was in the report for basically looking at SEPTA's fare system. And so this basically shows employment access by income. On the left, you have poor, lower income jobs, less than 25, and you have higher income jobs here, with 6 figures and up. And you can definitely see the job sprawl that is so apparent, within the city of Philadelphia, compared to, the high paying jobs in Center City. I think this really shows the disparity between how commuters and how workers, have to travel within the city. And the existing transit network is definitely not sufficient enough for this purpose. But when you add the regional rail layer in, you can see how much more of these jobs would be served, if regional rail was made more affordable and more frequent. And so we also have to look definitely at fare equity as well. Fifth Square actually, this past 2020, we definitely campaigned a lot on a fare plan in early January and February, which got free transit to Philadelphia for the first time ever. And we also got free transit for kids ages 12 and under. And this is a monumental achievement, we think, and it's definitely a solid foundation from which to build our regional rail work. We know that the fare system of SEPTA Key entrenches the existing segregation by importing all the legacy rules and including the zone regional rail fares, which has which is supposed to be, equidistant by duration, by distance from city center. But we know that, this really elevates fares on zone 2 and above to really an unaffordable level. And so our first step plan would be to integrate zone 1, as you see here, with the transit fare. This will bring in line with MBTA zone 1A plan and the LIR Atlantic ticket. And for passes, we would estimate that, if we got rid of the zone 1 trail pass for regional and replace it all with TransPass and make TransPass eligible for regional rail zone 1, it would only cost SEPTA about $1 million a year. So this is a very cheap investment for a very big gain. And we also have to look at accessibility considerations. We're talking about regional rail, of course. It's a very complicated system with a lot of lines, and we know that the elimination of the R lines, for these very verbose English names, really hinders accessibility. We think, especially with non-English populations. You can just see here the verbosity in this new Penn Medicine Station sign. And here you can see basically statistics within each line about how many stations are low level, mini platform, and high platform. You can see there's so much work to do, especially we consider Chestnut Hill here. And yet SEPTA, for their part, is spending most of this investment on parking garages. And so what our priority is really, we need to ask. And so here we want to refocus the conversation on Chestnut Hill because this is our target. For right now. So from Mount Airy to Philadelphia City Hall on transit, only on bus on Route 23, this would be 60-minute commute, a very, very long arduous commute, which people actually do. And this fare will be $250. Transfer to the BSL, Broad Street line at Broad and Erie, this would be 50 minutes, a slight improvement, but not too much. And the fare would be a free transfer, as we know. But on the Chestnut Hill East line, you would see another reduction in 10 minutes to 40-minute commute. But the fare here, as you see, is $525, which is nearly triple the price, right? And so we have to ask ourselves, which groups are effectively forced onto what modes, and who are we writing transit really for? I think this disparity, when you see very parallel commutes, leads to very different populations of people riding on the bus versus riding on regional rail trains. You can see the disparity here, when you have very, very crowded, Route 23 buses during the pandemic because of the Lifeline service. And then you see on the right here, just totally empty regional rail trains, And so Fifth Square actually did release an op-ed about a week ago saying how we can bring it back by our volunteers, Camille Bogan and Christina Guerrieri. It's really a product of structural racism, we think, and that it doesn't have to be like this. It's not just about restoring the ridership that was lost during the pandemic, which is a lot, but also trying to resiliently change the regional rail for stronger, more stronger ridership base in the future. And SEPTA has definitely, Philadelphia has definitely done this before with Operation Northwest. This was a 1958 proposal to basically directly subsidize the then private commuter railroads, Pennsylvania and Reading, as you know, to subsidize fares and also frequency. And the effect of this was astounding. The ridership jumped from 250% to 1,000%. And so we have definitely done this before, and we can definitely do it again. And so leave you this, the regional rail question is essentially an equity question. There's no other way to put around it. And this is what we think is super important. And so our petition is linked here below. If you're in Philadelphia or have anything to do with Philadelphia, we encourage you to look at it and just share it with your colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Next, we have Ethan Finland from Transit Matters. Ethan, you're up.
Hi. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen and make sure that works. Give me just a second to get the screen share going. Okay, can we see that okay?
You're
Excellent.
good.
Well, good evening. My name is Ethan Finland, and I'm the Regional Rail Campaign Coordinator for Transit Matters. As Ben mentioned, we're a Boston area transit advocacy group, and for the last 3 years, we've been working on a plan for transforming Metro Boston's commuter rail system into what we call a regional rail system, which follows the operational practices and delivery model that the the original plan for SEPTA Regional Rail called for. So just a bit about us. So Transit Matters is very much a in the weeds technical advocacy group, but we also place a priority on listening to community concerns and operating from a sort of equity perspective, especially with regards to this proposal, because as we'll talk about, the commuter rail system that exists now really only serves one population. And we take that level of critical analysis that has both been hashed out for several years now amongst transit experts and promote it to the general public to build an efficient, reliable, and equitable mass transit system. Oh dear. So just some brief background, like I mentioned, in 2017, we started working on this regional rail plan. I actually wasn't around at the time, but it was very heavily influenced by both technical advocacy and like I mentioned, the original SEPTA plan and sort of what we know as transit Twitter, going back and forth, talking about how American mainline rail really is an inefficient system, but also based on local concerns that I'll talk specifically that made the commuter rail system sort of a hot button issue around that time. So on that note, so in the early to mid 2010s, the commuter rail system encountered several high profile failures. So there was the winter of 2015, there were numerous system breakdowns. Really the whole MBTA was impacted quite substantially, but the commuter rail took the longest to recover, not only because it encompasses the most mileage, but also because the system was in such a poor state of repair. And there was a lot of talk at that time, sort of what the future of the commuter rail system would be, given that poor maintenance, and what the policymakers in the area really started to grapple with was that not enough ridership was being brought in. So you would occasionally hear comments along the lines of, is it even worth it to run this system? So sort of distilling the problem is this quote by Joe Aiello, who's the chair of the MBTA's board that was brought on in response to that winter 2015 crisis, pointing out that the system we have costs too much money for too little ridership. So in that context, the animations aren't working too well, so I'm just going to space these out a bit. We decided to take a look at the commuter rail system and how it could be improved. So the first observation in that analysis is to look at who commuter rail serves. So hopefully that's a little bit better. I'm sorry for the bad spacing there. So the urban core, both sides of the commuter rail serve downtown Boston, and the south side also serves Back Bay. Those two being the main job concentrations in Boston. It runs through several urban cities and neighborhoods in Cambridge, Boston, Somerville, Quincy, and numerous areas. Secondary cities, these often post-industrial, what they're called in Massachusetts is gateway cities. And these are often key environmental justice communities with relatively poor transit. And then low density suburbs with a mix of town center and park and ride stations. And unfortunately, most of the newer stations are of that park and ride orientation. And as with most other American commuter rail systems, really the only commute that this system is designed to serve is those 9 to 5 suburb to city rush hour commutes. And you can see that in the MBTA's schedules. So as was discussed earlier with SEPTA, where most lines only run hourly or every 2 hours off peak. The MBTA very much has a similar model. Most lines prior to the COVID-19 shelter-in-place orders, at which point service was at first cut back even further, only had about 4 to 7 midday round trips. So this is the Haverhill line. It's an example of a line that serves one of those post-industrial communities that has long commutes both to Boston and the rest of the region. But as you can see, it's really only geared to serve rush hour commuters, not just from Haverhill, but from the wealthier suburban communities in between, like Andover and Wilmington. And fares are, of course, higher than the subway service, even when it's in the same geographical area or paralleling. Now that has gotten a bit better in recent years. Some of the stations along the Red Line that the commuter rail also serves have had fares reduced, and the Fairmount line, which serves several environmental justice communities and is entirely within the city of Boston, was reduced to the subway fare or Zone 1A. But several gaps remain, and if you go just slightly further out of the city itself, the fare jumps from $2 and change to about $6.75. So even with those reductions, it's you're looking at like a $5 jump. So the system that we're proposing basically would transform those peaky schedules into schedules that run trains at least every 15 minutes in the inner core, and at least every half hour outside of sort of the Route 128 Beltway in both directions all day. Environmentally friendly, reliable trains achieved through electrification, because electrification is just a much more reliable technology. It allows service to run faster, and it of course has several environmental benefits as well through reducing pollution from trains and hopefully from single occupancy vehicles as well. And lastly, affordable fares and free timed connections to local bus service. And that's just a quick overview of the main components, most of which I suspect folks here are pretty familiar with, again, including high-level platforms and making strategic investments to double track bottlenecks, but only where it's necessary to do so. Of course, with electrification, it's much easier to schedule around those capacity pinches. Now, there's long been a contention within the MBTA that in order to run more service, you need to expand the downtown terminal stations, north and south stations. Especially South Station expansion is a very expensive project with it's projected to cost $2 to $3 billion and take up valuable downtown real estate to basically add more tracks at which to park trains for long periods throughout the day. So a key component of our plan is to instead engage in track renewal and switch replacements, copying the model seen in most recently in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and also in Japan and currently in the London terminal district as well. And if we do this and electrify and move to strategic changes like stationing crews on the platform, we can turn more trains at North and South stations than MassDOT plans with South Station expansion. And of course, further down the road, we support the North-South rail link, which would make throughput even faster. But the goal being to modernize the whole system first so that we don't run into some of the problems that were experienced in Philadelphia, where you got through running, but you didn't make the operational changes to get the most benefit out of it. And this is just a review of sort of phase one of the regional rail plan, which will electrify 3 key lines and get up to 30-minute headways throughout the system by 2026. Just talking about why electrification is so beneficial. One reason why it's attracted a lot of attention in Massachusetts in recent years is because the state has set a goal of 0 net carbon emissions by 2050. And obviously electrification of the rail system is necessary to achieve that. So the MBTA also undertook its own study of the future of commuter rail, and the T's board resolved last fall to start implementing a regional rail model with 15-minute headways and electrification starting on those 3 lines. Now, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic presents some new challenges, but in terms of ridership, but we believe that makes this model all the more crucial, because if we can no longer rely on peak hour ridership to generate the substantial loads that it does now, then commuter rail is going to need to serve staggered shifts, which often mean not the 9-to-5 option, and also providing service for essential workers. The MBTA's bus system has lost the least ridership during this crisis, and the Fairmount line, which I mentioned earlier, was sort of been long derided for having low ridership. Of course, that's because it runs peaky commuter rail service in a neighborhood that should have anywhere else it would be considered a subway line in terms of the infrastructure that exists, but it's retained the most ridership. So we believe that this can make that now is more than ever the project is important. So phase 1 will implement electrification, step-free access, and 15-minute all-day service on the early action lines, and expand high-level platforms to the busiest stations by 2026, and eliminate the worst bottlenecks so that all lines can be running at least 30-minute service. Of course, prior to electrification, unfortunately, reliability will always be a challenge. So the 3 lines that the MBTA's board, the Fiscal Management and Control Board, proposed for this initial modernization and informed our phase 1 plan are the Providence-Stoughton line, the Fairmount line, and the inner half of what's called the Newburyport-Rockport line. And the reason for attacking those lines first is because Providence-Stoughton is the busiest commuter rail line, connects the 2 largest urban centers, in eastern New England. The Fairmount line serves dense, low-income communities and who must rely on slow and crowded buses. It can take up to an hour to get downtown or to the Back Bay using bus and rapid transit transfers. And the inner Newburyport-Rockport corridor has a sort of a similar layout, but similarly poor transit access. And further north, the stations at Salem and Beverly already have some of the highest ridership outside of Boston. So moving forward, Transit Matters is going to be releasing reports on each line, starting with the early action lines and then the rest of the system. And we believe that we've gotten actually a lot of support for moving away from this peak focus model. It's in pretty much all discussions of the future of transportation, the idea of regional rail and a non-peak oriented system is mentioned, and generally mentioned favorably. So thanks so much. And again, I'm sorry for the some of the sort of awkward transitions on this slide. And I'm happy to take questions as we move into the panel discussion.
We have one more speaker after that, but if you have any questions for Ethan, please send them to Will and we'll start collecting those. Next is Andrew Simpson from Otis.
Great, thank you. I don't have any slides or anything beyond just a couple things we wanted to share, and mostly I just wanted to be in the room and listen to what everyone had to say. So first off, like I was introduced, my name is Andrew Simpson. I kind of said in the chat, I'm here in lieu of Chris Pahalski, or who I work with at the city's Office of Transportation, Otis, as we go by. So my role is a transit policy planner. So I handle coordination with things with SEPTA and the city's planning efforts and stuff like that around transit. So we're in the midst of a project some of you might have heard about. We're working on a transit plan. So this was kind of came out of a few places. The Jarrett Walker report, which I usually have to explain, but I know tonight I really don't have to say much else about to you folks, but it recommended that the city put together a plan for transit and really how to get buses moving on our streets and take some serious steps towards that. So that was the first place it came from. It was a project that or a plan we committed to in the Connect plan that we wrote about 2 years ago. That came out and said we would basically do that, as well as a lot of other things. So kind of coming from those places, the main focus of that work is, like I said, on the bus network, kind of preparing the city for a bus network redesign, figuring out how we can kind of institute and transit priority into streets projects and kind of get transit moving in anticipation of a better bus network that gets more people to where they need to be. With that said, we couldn't waste the opportunity to talk about some other aspects of the transit system and kind of set the city's set a kind of stake in the ground on where the city is on some of these issues and where we're at today, and kind of begin a conversation, hopefully with folks like you and the broader public, about some of these things. And one of those is definitely regional rail. I think if you sat through the last hour or so of this, you kind of see what the opportunity is. We've seen the same things for a long time, and are I think on the same page as most of what was presented here tonight, especially the larger picture of kind of tapping into a fairly underperforming asset compared to what it could be if its full value was realized. So I think the realizing its values, the inequity that's built into the fare structure, and the service patterns are definitely a big part of it. Didn't mention it too much, but the opportunity that SEPTA-Key actually does provide to implement this is clear, and it's taken a while to get there, but definitely will allow for a pretty seamless fare system. Really pretty much already or almost does. So that's another major hurdle that we're getting through. And then some other aspects that have elevated this as something we want to talk about in this plan. If we do want to dedicate more space to things other than cars, especially in Center City, we do have to have good alternative modes to preserve growth and set us up for success. No doubt about that. And regional rail is a major part of that, as well as all the other aspects of the transit system. And then, to kind of get the other main thing I think we brought us into this is we need to start a strategic vision as a city, as a region, as a transit agency. I'm a planner, as most of the folks I work with are. So it doesn't surprise you when we say, we need a plan. We need a vision to operate under, and it's not that plan will be perfect. It never is when you're dealing with a long range plan. There are things that will come up and things that will change, but we need to get started on that. And we've been operating our regional rail system without that strategic vision for too long, at least in the actions. We have a great strategic vision that was written, Professor Fuchik, but we've been working without really a framework. So a little bit about what we're doing and what you can expect to see, hopefully later this fall, early winter. The scope of this is not large. This is not a a multi-million-dollar planning study. This is kind of our foot in the door of what we've talked about tonight. How do we get to these sorts of things? So hopefully we can put together some of the obstacles. A lot of the ones that were there and from the planning work in the 80s are still there. Some of them are different. Some of the regulations and things like that have changed. We have ADA. We have a few things that are different. A lot of things that are the same, but kind of brush a lot of that off, present it in a kind of a coherent place. I think we, and the goal of the work is also, I think, important to know. So we want to, support SEPTA going forward into a strategic process, planning process for regional rail. That's definitely something that we're going to talk about in our work as a next step. This is something that the agency does have to own. And I think there's definitely some appetite to do that, but we need to be strong and encouraging in supporting that. This will give us a platform, I think, and give you all a platform to advocate from. That's really important, is, making it clear that we as a city, as the city, kind of capital C city, see this as having value, even relative to other needs, because there's always going to be a lot of other needs to be dealt with, but we need to articulate that for us. And then lastly, it's presenting a vision that we can kind of start a public conversation around. That maybe at the end of the day, the vision we put out is half right or mostly right with some alterations, but we need a public process and really that conversation around it. But yeah, kind of what's going to be in it, in the vision that we're going to propose or outline. Frequent service is kind of the main thing. Obviously, talked a lot about that tonight, what that means and stuff like that. Putting in paper some of our fare equity goals that I think are going to be in line with a lot of what you guys are thinking about. And then also kind of linking our vision for regional rail with our other transit visions and modal visions and strategies. So yeah, that's what I have. Appreciate it. Happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We are now in the Q&A portion of our event. The first question is for Sandy. Can you talk a bit about the MBTA's recent COVID fare experiment? And how does equalizing regional rail fares relieve congestion on other modes?
So I'm afraid I actually don't. I have a professional policy not to talk about Boston-related things in public. So I will refer that question to Ethan. I will say, one thing I will say is that what the MBTA is doing with commuter rail fares during COVID, I think is very interesting. They implemented, I think, a 5-day pass so that you can, basically the idea is that instead of buying a monthly pass because people are not going into the office as frequently, you can use it 5 times over a defined period of time. But I don't remember the exact details. So Ethan, if you can weigh in on that, I'm sure you'll be able to say more.
Yeah, so the MBTA was already kind of looking at a lot of different fare policy approaches prior to the pandemic, and there sort of got, unfortunately, got tied up in a fare modernization program that's seen some significant delays. With respect to what's been going on right now, there were a few interesting things have happened. For a while, the local buses were effectively free with rear door boarding. That's since been reversed. And then on some of the commuter rail lines, there's been a move to allow riders to present a Charlie card to pay for service. I'm sorry, I was getting that confused with an earlier plan. They lowered the fare from Lynn, which is a community where there's a lot of bus commuting to the subway line down there. But there's a commuter rail line that goes through there, but it's very infrequent and it's very expensive. That was one of the communities I was referring to where there's the $4 fare, $4 to $5 fare jump. So they're piloting making commuter rail fares a little cheaper, at least for a period of time during the pandemic. And we'd like to see that continue to be the case, because that's short of expanding frequency, which takes a little more work. That's sort of the only way you're going to start getting ridership from some of these communities now. And also with respect to the question about relieving on congestion on other modes, I think that's sort of what the MBTA was hoping for with this Lynn pilot, to sort of not have the buses be as crowded, and it just provides a much faster trip. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Thanks. I believe that Dr. Vucek had something to say. Do you want to speak?
Yes, I do, and I will have to leave after that. I'm sorry.
That's really fine. Go ahead.
Just to add a few things. Talking about Boston, I was involved sometime, 20 years ago, when there was a suggestion to connect the South Station and North Station, which would have been somewhat similar to the Philadelphia case. And I still get, every few years, that project comes up. So I hope that someday in the future, Boston will build that connection. What does such a line do? In Philadelphia also, there used to be, there was one crisis with a few riders in 1960s or so, and then they poured more money and attracted many passengers. But then about 1980, some began to say, well, is it worth really this whole huge system costs so much money and so on? When the commuter tunnel was built and line opened like now, nobody mentions ever that that system should not be further improved rather than neglected. So in Boston also, you have to be careful that you should increase the role of regional rail if you build such a tunnel there. Second point I have is that integration of regional rail and other modes. When we did one of many studies for SEPTA and so on, we went to Chester, and Chester has a nice bus terminal at the train station. So I don't know, 8 or 10 bus lines come there and so on. And we made a survey, how many people go from bus to the train, just climb up and there. We virtually couldn't count anybody. I mean, we have this, logical bus terminal to the regional rail, and totally nobody uses connection. Why? Because the fares are not integrated. And there are many people from Chester who would go, say, for work in the yard or cleaners or whatever, from Chester, go to Paoli and so on. They would come by bus and have to pay one fare, and then pay the fare on the regional rail, and then another one that eats up whatever they can earn out there in Paoli. So, and that's again, there's not enough innovation in saying our goal is to attract most passengers rather than convenience of these. And I hope that you push this effort. What you are doing is exactly what I've been doing for 40 years. Let's try to push this and really press SEPTA to tell us what kind of regional rail system they see. This one with high and low platforms for the next 80 years, or that everybody has to check the ticket. And now they have you enter the station at Penn, what is it? Penn Medicine Station, University City Station. They check your ticket there. And then on the train, another conductor comes in and checks. Why do you check them twice? What's going on? So the efficiency in operations and emphasis on passengers rather than convenience and marketing. We, as many people from suburbs, we take at Swarthmore, we would take Swarthmore to the concert. We have subscription and so on. Those trains just leave the center city so that you cannot, you miss it if you stay up to the end of the concert. So that is a wasted thing. And way back, some riders from here asked that they move the departure of Media Train by 10 minutes so we can catch it. And they did it. SEPTA did it that time. Now it doesn't. We miss again. And what do? In the middle of winter, of course, I drive into Center City. Otherwise, I can get stuck at City Hall for 55 minutes waiting for the next train. So let's press SEPTA to do more constructive things. Think in the future rather than defend the operations with everybody, conductors canceling every ticket. That was done from 1880s to now. So I am delighted that you are bringing up regional rail. It's a huge system with huge potential, mishandled and not given much attention. So thank you very much.
Thank you for coming and speaking, and we're delighted that you came. I totally understand the rail problem, having gone to one Philadelphia Union game, and it was only the once because it's difficult to get back from Chester. This leads us into another question for Ben, which is, so what is the predicted fiscal impact of making regional rail within the city the same fare as SEPTA fares? Is it possible SEPTA would recoup more money with increases in lower fare passengers? Are you talking about TransPass or cash fare passengers being able to pay $2 for single regional rail trips?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is definitely the $64,000 question. And I think definitely, like, when you think about, like, when it comes to revenue, I think SEPTA definitely, the main reason why they're so resistant to regional rail probably has to do with revenue, I would say. And the fact that I think we perceive that they're so conservative with their estimates and revenue predictions that they really don't want to rock the boat. They really don't think in terms of expanding ridership, as will happen. But definitely we provided this very simple, I guess, analysis, just looking at what it takes to run, trap passes and to make them, parity. So we know how many people take Zone 1 passes, how many people take Trans passes, right? For each week and for each month. And if you multiply that out by the actual costs, we can see the revenue gained through each type of pass. And we know that, for the entire year, you would basically have around, $1 million deficit if you decrease the pass of Zone 1, which is 105, and made them all Trans passes, which is 96, So that's like, we know that exists, and additional ridership would definitely cover that even more. And for regular fares, that would be a much more laborious, question about cost benefits there. But we think that bringing up the equity argument is still very crucial. And I think that it's time to at least look at SEPTA as not something that's very segregated by mode and by the private transit, companies that previously ran it. It really needs to be just a totally integrated system where it's mode agnostic, and that that one person can get from one part like Northeast Philadelphia to Center City, in in the most, fast and efficient way. And we think that, it could really be done. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
The next question is for Ethan. How did Transit Matters manage to successfully get the conversation about regional rail into the public consciousness? And how did the group manage to impact people at the MBTA and on the FMCB?
It's a great question. I think the primary, so I think it was a combination of commuter rail being sort of a salient issue in the Boston area, and also our framing of it as a new business model. There's sort of this understanding that commuter rail is kind of and when I say new business model, there's the understanding that commuter rail is primarily for commuters going from the suburbs. So sort of, not to drone on a geography lesson, but sort of that outside the main 128 beltway are some of these lower density, wealthy and bluntly white suburbs. And that's the primary ridership base. So we highlighted that, commuter rail could actually serve some of these closer in communities, but the reason why it doesn't, and consequently why the reason why ridership suffers so much, and it's such a such a classist system, is because of the pricing, is because the frequency is geared only to those 9 to 5 commutes. On some lines, there's barely any weekend service. I'll give an example. That Newburyport Rockport line, there's on Saturdays, there's been an hour and a half gap. So if you live in Lynn or Chelsea, there's a you can't use it to get to and from either of those cities, or a job center further north, or to Boston if you work a Saturday shift. So we really highlighted that the assets to greatly boost transit capacity in Metro Boston already exist. We're just not using them to their full potential. And that, I think, sort of distinguished it from, we got to build all these new subway extensions, which are great, but cost a lot of money, when in reality we can start with the assets that we have on the ground now. And I think the other component was just talking about it from the perspective of people who say, okay, well, it's nice to do all these things to get more transit riders, but let's make the system we have work now. That's a line that we hear a lot in this area, that sort of geared towards transit improvement skepticism. And we took that and said, okay, well, yes, let's fix it, but let's fix it in such a way that makes it a more resilient system. And we're not just putting Band-Aids on these old freight locomotives that only have at best 10 more years of useful life. Let's get electrified trains, which save us money over the long term.
Thank you. And the next question is for Andrew. Which line would Otis like to see upgraded to regional rail level of service first?
A good one. I have to say, well, we will see. I think we need to put together our thoughts. But I think it's a pretty good argument for a few lines. I'll say. I think the airport line has always been on the table and on folks' agenda. I think the Norristown line is also makes a lot of sense in connecting two of the region's biggest centers. But I think we're also looking through what some of the obstacles are to the frequency, and thinking about what are the quick wins versus what are the priorities. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And one more question. Can you explain Otis's relationship with SEPTA?
Sure. I think a couple different levels of relationship. The most formal being Mike Carroll, the Deputy Managing Director and head of our office, is a SEPTA board member, and is one of the 2 members appointed by the city on the boards. There's a very formal relationship there, but I think where most work gets done is on the staff level. I saw on the attendance thing tonight, a handful of folks from both sides, mostly just kind of working through issues and stuff together, meeting. I think in our final document, I think we're going to have a little bit more explanation for folks. I think this question comes up a lot and on kind of what are some of the committee structures and like how do we actually try to coordinate these things. But yeah, we have standing committees, regular meetings, text chains, emails, all of that. But most things happen through just kind of through those staff channels. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. That is the end of our Q&A, and I'd like to thank you all for attending, but I'd like to talk to you for a moment about what Fifth Square is up to. Ben mentioned some of our recent wins, and Will is going to fill in about what those wins were.
Hey, how's it going? So let's talk about Fifth Square for 1 second. I'm going to toot our own horn here. My name is Will. I'm an organizer with Fifth Square. I'm pretty involved. I'm also a contributing member. Fifth Square is Philly's Urbanist Political Action Committee. We formed in 2014 to support candidates for local elected office who are committed to policy change in the areas of transportation, land use, and public space, and to advance a vision for a more accessible, sustainable, equitable Philadelphia for all of its residents. So I want to talk about our huge win back in July, so like a couple months ago. COVID time feels like 3 years ago, right? So after over 3 years of continued advocacy with Fifth Square's One City, One Fair campaigns, here I got a little poster. We had a One City, One Fair campaign for 3 years. We were able to achieve free transfers implemented by SEPTA back in July on all subways, buses, and trolleys. Also huge, we advocated in one free rides for children under 12 on board SEPTA's entire system, including regional rail. This was a huge step for SEPTA, a huge step for Philadelphia as we move towards a more equitable and sustainable future. This eases the burden for families who need transit and for riders who rely on transferring to get around our city, many of whom come from areas of deep poverty. As an entirely volunteer organization, this was a next level win for us. And we have our sights set on regional rail, modernizing our regional rail system next. So this is like we're in it for the long haul here. So we were in free transfers for the long haul, and this is our next marathon race here. And it was made possible through the support of our volunteers and our membership. This is an all volunteer organization. And I'm going to throw it back to Cameron, who's going to talk about what we're working on recently in other areas and how to get a really cool gold Fifth Square shirt sent to you for free. Me and Cameron are both wearing them now. So go ahead, Cameron. Show off your shirt.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of my chair is too short for that, but yes. So right now we have a couple of petitions. One is the petition for the current regional rail thing, as you can see. If you go to fifthsquare.org/RR_petition, you can go ahead and sign it and make sure and just keep those numbers pumping. We also have two other petitions. One is against the exclusionary zoning of Society Hill, and the other is to demand that PennDOT makes Cobbs Creek Parkway safer. We can put those links in the chat and also send them later. If you enjoyed tonight's presentation and you want to help us advocate for regional rail and other community-focused projects, you can join us as a member. You can sign up at fifthsquare.org/membership. You will get a free t-shirt like the one me and Will are wearing delivered to you, and access to our members-only Slack chat room where we discuss how to move the needle with SEPTA and more. And if you're ready to ride SEPTA soon, Fifth Square has a limited run of SEPTA-themed face masks. They're selling out fast, so get one today. Head to fifthsquare.org/store to purchase yours. All right, that's it for the plugs. Once again, I'd like to thank tonight's panelists, Dr. Vukan Vucek, Sandy Johnston, Ethan Finland. Special thanks to Camille Bogan and Christina Gary for their op-ed piece, and Putnam, Ben Shee, and Will Tung for production assistance. I'm Cameron Adamas for Fifth Square. Thank you and good night.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a big night. All right.